Hey there, Agile Chupacabras, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner, day in and day out. I have some great news to report to you listeners. This month, it turned out that our listener base is comparable to the listener base of the Joe Rogan podcast. If you use a wide enough scope to compare them and you round all your numbers up to the nearest 2 million. So that's great news. We're super excited about that here at Integrity, and I'm hoping that this episode is just as popular. If you've been following along, we've been talking about how we help clients come to ideas about MVPs, how we kind of lead them into a minimum viable product idea, starting with the users that we're serving, the things that need to get done, and then kind of narrowing this focus as we go until we get to a small, deliverable, valuable product. And we've been talking about different facets of that. Last week, we talked about feature selection, which is probably the thing that most people are interested in. And it's kind of fun the way we do it. There's a lot of different pieces to it. So might want to listen to that episode a few different times if you're taking inspiration from the way we go about it. Today, I want to talk about schedule and cost. When I'm doing MVP workshops with clients, I usually combine these into one thing because they're very closely related. They're closely related because a lot of the cost comes from the development time. In fact, in most cases, that is easily the bulk of the cost. Not always, but in most cases. But they're also very similar in their implications because depending on what you see from a scheduling or a cost perspective, that's going to influence whether or not you are ready to jump. Because any significant variation in these or any significant impact that the schedule or the cost has is probably going to be in and of itself reason to make a meaningful pivot if those numbers are too high. For example, you might lay out a timeline to get the MVP out the door, and you'll find that you won't get to the market as fast as you were wanting to. Maybe a competitor is coming out with something, or you're building a product that takes advantage of a hot new trend, but the MVP isn't going to be ready for 9 months. Well, is the trend still going to be hot for 9 months? Is anyone even still going to want to be doing that in 9 months, right? So the schedule is important because if we are taking too long to get to market, then that may cause us to rethink our idea. And kind of the same with cost. We've had clients come in the door before with great ideas for software, and we kind of put things together. We boil it down into an MVP, very small subset of the value of their larger product. We show them the timeline and cost, and then they tell us things like, oh, well, I'm not really sure that I can afford that. Well, if you can't afford the MVP, what are you doing? You're sure not going to be able to afford the whole product then. So knowing the cost, and especially as you compare it to the value, it gives you a key indicator of whether we should keep going down this road or whether we need to meaningfully rethink this product, either the nature of it, the scope of it, or maybe not even do it, or radically rethink the way we're going to try to get it done. These two ingredients just often have a high impact on our estimation about the MVP. So as I begin to open up how we come to these conclusions with schedule and cost, one thing that you are going to need to come to terms with is these things are not certain. Now, if you've been in the Agile community in a while, you're probably okay with that. You've probably been beating that drum in your own organization for some time. We know people are bad at estimating. We're bad at estimating anything, really. And the further out you go in time and scope for a project, the more those little flaws in estimating become bigger and bigger and bigger. When my dad was teaching me how to shoot a rifle when I was younger, one of the things that he used to say was, if the barrel even moves a millimeter, by the time it gets to where the target is, that millimeter could have turned into inches or maybe even several feet, depending on how far away it is. And that's kind of how uncertainty in estimation goes, right? Like if I'm trying to estimate what I'm going to get done in the next 5 minutes, I might be just off by a few seconds, but if I'm trying to estimate what I'm going to get done in the next 2 years, I'm probably going to be way off, right? Every little deviation is just going to magnify itself. And there's just so much we don't know, so you have to be okay with the fact that any projection we're doing here at the beginning to plan the MVP, we're talking about a probability. We are not talking about a certainty. So you want to be careful when you're making your plans, right? So let's say we're planning out the MVP together and I come up with a cost for that MVP that's $10,000. And you're like, well, that's my entire seed round of funding. Well, we might want to think more critically about this then, because if that's your entire seed round of funding, then even if I'm right, you're not going to have any money left over for any of the other things you need to do. And I may not be right. It could be $12,000. It might be $15,000. It might be $6,000 too. I mean, this is just the nature of knowledge work and the evolution of software development. But if we're taking that as a ballpark idea, that kind of gives you an indicator of whether or not it's wise to continue with the MVP as planned. But you do have to keep in mind that these things are not certainties, which is why when I work with clients, I always try to attach the probability to whatever other numbers I happen to be giving them, if I'm able to do that. When we are calculating the schedule and cost, this is often a fairly in-depth activity in most organizations. So when I'm doing the workshop, I usually save it to the end or not do it at all. Every organization that I do work for usually has some kind of in-house way of coming to these numbers. And if that's been working for you, just use that, right? And you don't need me for that. You can calculate the schedule and cost on your own with whatever method you feel comfortable with, and that's fine. But I like to save it to the end or just leave it up to the organization, just because this can be a lot of work. So as you are putting your own MVP together, and if you're using this process, great. If you're kind of using it loosely, that's great. Just know that the process of coming up with the schedule and cost is probably going to take a while. And so you probably don't want to do it in the middle of your MVP planning unless you can afford to spend a day or two on it, on just this thing. So first, let's talk about the schedule, the timeline, if you will. This is important because a huge deal of the cost comes from this. If we're talking about software development, at least, a lot of your cost for the MVP is going to come for paying developers, funding development. Again, this isn't always the case, depending on the nature of the product, but it is by far and away often the case. So if you've done the previous exercises, then you have a feature list for the MVP and you have a sequence in which you're going to be getting these things out the door already. You can always resequence them if you want, reprioritize them if you want. There's nothing magical about the way that I like to do these things. I'm just saying, if you've done the other stuff up to this point, you've selected your features and you already have a sequence. So now that you have a sequence, then you use your favorite forecasting method. You've got a number of features, right? So how long is it going to take to get those features out the door? And since you have them in a sequence, if you already have a technique to forecast these things, then you can apply that in micro increments to even give an idea of when these individual features might even be ready for review. If you don't have a method that you're happy with, let me tell you what we do. The first thing we do is we take these features and we break them up into work items. This is where things kind of take a long time, right? Because depending on how we go about this, it can just take a while. We probably need to have users involved in this conversation, and that, may lengthen the amount of time. But we want to break these things up into work items. Now, for us and the products that we build, most of the time, those work items are user stories. Not every single one, but the overwhelming majority of them are user stories. So we're probably going to sit down with users and we're going to say, okay, we've got this user journey we're trying to fulfill. We are building these features to support this journey. Kind of tell me how you do this thing. And as they talk, we break this conversation up into the smallest deliverable units of value that we can. I'm almost positive that somewhere in the past, I've done a podcast episode or two on user stories. So you can go back and reference those. If I haven't, I don't know what I was thinking, because that is an important part of software development. So that's what we do. We break these features down into their smallest units of value. And now at least we have an approximation of how many work items it's going to take to get this MVP out the door. So then we look at how often does our team complete work items? How many work items do they complete over time? Is it 1 per day? Is it 3 per week? Is it, whatever it is, some number over some span of time? That's the team's throughput, right? So I take the team's throughput, I look at the quantity of work we have, and then if I'm just kind of doing a back of the cocktail napkin kind of calculation, then that may be all I need to do, right? if our MVP has, say, 11 user stories, and I know that the team I'm going to use for this gets about 2 user stories done per week, well, then my MVP is probably going to take about 6 weeks to get out the door, right? And now I have an idea of the timeline. At Integrity, if we're just sitting around, drinking our old fashions and talking about projects, that's probably good enough to give you a ballpark. But we actually run Monte Carlo simulations. We usually run 10,000 simulations over the data set that I just described, because what that lets us do is it not only lets us see all the possible outcomes, but it also allows us to assign probabilities for those outcomes. So let's say I've got 11 user stories in the MVP. I can take this team's throughput, I can run 10,000 simulations, and I can aggregate the end results of those. And I might find that, say, 75% of my simulations come out in a month or less. So there's a 75% chance that we'll get done in a month or less. If we increase the probability, then we have to increase the timeline, right? Well, I want to be 85% sure of the end date. Okay, well, 85% sure, now we're up to 6 weeks, right? Well, I want to be 95% sure. Okay, well, now we're up to 2 months. You keep the simulations keep adding those buffers of time to get the higher level of certainty. But that's what we do, because then you can pick what level of probability you're willing to live with. Again, you're never going to get 100%, right? And even if you could, you would need an infinitely long amount of time in order to get 100% probability. So I find that most organizations kind of camp out around the 85% mark. It's high enough that it's far more likely to happen than not, but still recognizes that, there's a not insignificant chance that it could take longer than we think. At 85%, the timeline is long enough to cover most cases. So it's a pretty good place to hang out, but obviously your mileage may vary. Okay, so now, using this technique, or whatever technique you like to use, we now have figured out roughly what the timeline is going to be for this MVP and the sequence in which things are going to roll out for this MVP. So now that we know that, now we are in a position to think about cost. So again, like I said, the timeline is going to have the highest factor here for most projects, most MVPs. The amount of time it takes is going to be your biggest cost, because you got to pay people, right, to build this thing. So you can take your timeline and you can take your number of developers, and if you're contracting with a firm, it might be an hourly rate. If you are using full-time employees of your own, you might have to do a little bit more math, right? Take their salary, get it down to like a daily rate or something, and then see how many days the MVP is going to be, and that's your cost for that. I don't know how you're going to be building this MVP, so how you calculate the cost of development could be very different. I do want to make a quick note here, though, about if you do contract with developers, whether it's individual developers or whether it's a firm like ours, really be careful about firms that give you a fixed price. Like, here's how much this is going to cost, especially if they're basing that cost off of timeline, because any firm that knows what they're doing knows that they can't give you a hard line cost. They can give you an estimated cost perhaps, but they can't give you a hard line cost. And firms that are honest will tell you that. So if you have a firm that's like, yes, we can absolutely get this done, in 4 weeks, and it's absolutely going to be $20,000, be careful. They are concealing key information from you. They may not intentionally be doing it, but they are. So just make sure if someone tells you that you have a further conversation with them to ferret out the uncertainty. Where is that number coming from? How can you be sure to kind of ferret out the parts of the project that are not as well defined as that firm might be making it sound like it is? But anyway, the biggest part of the cost is probably going to be the development cost, but you also have to think about other things, right? The infrastructure for this MVP. Where's it going to live, right? And what system resources do you need in order for this MVP to actually deliver value? Are you hosting it in the cloud? You almost have to have a slide rule and experience at NASA sometimes to figure out what the pricing is going to be on the cloud, even though it's a great solution for a lot of MVPs. It just takes some work, right? It takes some thinking. When we're starting out, what's our demand likely to be? Therefore, how much processing power are we actually going to need? How often is our database resource going to be used? Based on where we're at now with the MVP, what are the costs going to be involved in getting us set up and getting this value to deliver? You also sometimes have to think about the cost of third-party libraries or the harnessing of third-party APIs. For example, a lot of startups I talk to these days are doing something with AI. And as a result, a lot of them, because they are startups and they're trying to kind of bootstrap and get something out early, they are harnessing like the OpenAI APIs or APIs similar to that, Bard, or the name of Google's eludes me right now. But they're using some existing AI APIs that they're passing information to that costs money, right? It often even costs money to develop against because they don't necessarily charge you differently for development versus production. So that's something you have to look into as well, because that's going to factor into the cost of your MVP. So that kind of gives you an idea of the technical things that you're going to be paying for. But then you also have to think about, how am I going to get the word out about this MVP? How am I going to let people know it's out here and drive people to the MVP? Now, depending on your project and how you're going to be using this MVP, this cost might be next to nothing, right? Like if I'm delivering this software, it's line of business software that we're going to use internally, all my users are already here, then it's just a matter of snagging a couple of employees from time to time to mess with our MVP and give us feedback, right? If this MVP is meant to be the demo version of our product, that's a little different, right? Because now people have to be aware it exists. How are you going to get that word out there? Are you going to run ads? Are you going to have a marketer? Are you going to have salespeople? How are people going to know that your MVP is out there so that they come to it, they get it, and they use it, and you start getting the feedback that you need? That factors into your costs as well. There's other things that you can probably think of that I'm not dwelling on right now, but those are the big ones that are really going to impact the cost of the MVP. So now you have a schedule, you got a timeline, and you've got the costs. And this is where you start thinking about, is this worth it, right? Is the value that I'm going to get out of this MVP worth the investment that I'm looking at? And folks, it's good to ask yourself that question. There's a lot of companies that don't ask themselves that question. They look at the timeline, they look at the cost, and they're like, okay, and they forge ahead. They get their A series funding or whatever, and off they go. This is meant to be a real kind of line in the sand, reality check kind of moment. Don't build stuff that you're going to go broke building, right? Don't build stuff where you're going to spend a ton of money and not get a lot out of it. This is where you should be stopping yourself from doing the project if the project is ultimately going to cause you harm, if it's ultimately going to be a failure, and you know that before you start. That's the whole reason we're doing this, right? So be rigorous about it. Be honest with yourself. And it's hard, I understand. I work with a lot of startups and a lot of founders, and I know they are emotionally attached to their baby, right? They've had this brilliant idea and they are attached to it, and they just don't want to let it go no matter how impractical it may seem. But this is the time, right? This is the time. You don't want to think about, getting married to someone and you got a long sheet of reasons why it's never going to work out, and then go, yeah, but I'm really committed to this idea. I really want to get married. I think it's a good idea, and this person's up for it. So here we go. You would never do that, right? You would be like, oh my gosh, I got a whole sheet of paper telling me I shouldn't marry this person. This is not a great start, right? At the very least, I want to think more about it, right? And that's what this is meant to do. Having said that, I do want to kind of moderate this a little bit, because we're looking at cost and we're looking at time and we're sort of comparing it against value. And I want to tell you that when it comes to software that's in a complex domain, value is very difficult to predict. In my opinion, it's more difficult to predict than the timeline ever was. And we know how difficult timelines are to predict, right? Predicting value is very difficult. Again, not in every project, not in every industry. Sometimes it's very straightforward to predict the value of what you've built, but in most cases it isn't. So as you're thinking about that in your head, just kind of keep that in mind, that what you're thinking of is the value that you're getting. It's kind of a volatile figure, and you're never going to really know until you've built the thing. That's the sad part. You're never going to know how long it's going to take until you've built it, how much it's going to cost until you've built it. You're never going to really know how valuable it is until you've built it. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that there's other parts of the value to the MVP besides just the MVP itself. Yes, the value that you're getting from the MVP is a big chunk of it, right? If people are buying it or subscribing to it, or you're getting some time savings out of it, that's great. But part of the value you're getting from building this MVP is the feedback, right? It's the information you're going to get from your market, from your buyers, to tell you which direction it should go. How much money would you spend to know which direction you should go in your market? Probably a lot, right? So that goes into the value equation too. That may justify the cost of the MVP right there. Another part of the value is when you build this MVP, you are also building the foundation and the infrastructure for the rest of the product. Now, again, depending on the role your MVP plays, you may scrap what you've built and then build something new. That's always a possibility. But if I'm building an MVP, I've already got an infrastructure stood up for it. I've already got data persistence set up for it, most likely. I've got a middle tier built out. I got an API spun up. I've got a front end library all configured and working. I've made the chain work for at least one stream of value, right? And that's time that I've invested that I don't have to keep reinvesting as we add to the product. I've already implemented the hard things that take a long time, and that will speed up future development. And that, of course, has value as well. So I hope this has helped you. Schedule and cost is difficult. It's an area with a lot of unknowns. You need to, as the song goes, hold on loosely, but don't let go. We need to use this information to make informed decisions, but you also need to keep in mind that until we've built something and put it out the door and we have people using it, that's really where we're really going to learn what we need to know. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.